Hello and welcome to this video all about how to make teeny tiny patchwork flowers. They are some of my favourite things to make and they are perfect for using up scrap fabrics. In fact, they are perfect for using up the tiniest scraps, which is what I'm going to be using today. Tiny scraps of Liberty fabric that I've got left over from other projects or that have been given to me by people. Even this small triangle there, even that can be used, so that's why I love this project so much. As well as scraps, you'll need a hand sewing needle and hand sewing thread, and I'm using hexiform shapes. I'm using 3/8 of an inch hex petals and 1/3/8 of an inch hexagon for the centre of this first flower that I'm going to show you. So first, baste your shapes just like you would for any English paper piecing project. You just cut out your fabric with a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, and I use the glue pen to baste around the edges. I have a video that shows this more in depth if you'd like to watch it, and I'll link it above. Next, do the same for the petals, and I'm just choosing a part of the fabric that is going to look really good on this petal. And I'm just cutting it out with roughly a 1/4 inch seam allowance, maybe a little bit less. I'm not too precise here and it really doesn't matter. And baste it in exactly the same way, except you've got a curved edge at the top. So that just requires a little bit of extra attention just to make sure that you get your curve nice and smooth. So I just gently push the fabric over the edge, and you might need to add a bit more glue. Then do the other straight side. And then if you notice there's some bumpy bits at the top, just push them down with your finger and get a nice smooth edge. Curves are not as tricky as you might think. And then do the bottom edge. And your first petal is done. Repeat for the other 5 petals. I love doing this because it allows you to look really closely at the tiny details in the fabric and to pick something really small to fussy cut, so you can get the tiniest of flowers on your petals. Now it's time to sew them together, and it's really simple to do. It's just like sewing hexagons together to make a hexy flower. It's done in exactly the same way with a whip stitch. Just make sure you get the corners lined up and you do a locking stitch in the corner and then just simply whip stitch along that edge. Really simple, and it took me about half an hour to make this flower from start to finish, so it's quite a quick project. Now I decided that I wanted to embroider a flower in the centre. I have a video that shows how to do that in more depth, and as you can see I'm backing this flower with felt because I want to make it into a brooch. And if you make bigger pieces of miniature patchwork, it's nice to back it in felt. You can make a mini quilt that way. So this is a useful technique. I do this quite a bit actually. So I've just used the glue pen to stick down the flower, and then I'm just cutting around the edge really close, but obviously not cutting the patchwork. And I find that's the best way to get the exact size. It's better than drawing around it and cutting it out, because sometimes that can be a bit too big and you still need to trim it down a bit. And then I'm just doing a stitch where I'm just catching the inside of the patchwork flower and bringing it up through the felt. I'm making sure that my needle and thread do not go through to the front of the flower, and I'm also taking care that I'm not too close to the edge of the felt, because the felt can sort of break away and your stitches won't be secure. So I'm just checking that as I go along, and if you sew the back on in this way your stitches won't show hardly at all. Now I'm running the thread through to the centre because I've sewn all the way around, and that means I can use the same thread to attach a brooch back to the flower. I definitely think I need to wear some more Liberty and some more EPP, so I've made this little accessory that I might wear on my cardigan or on my coat. You could also pin it to a bag. I just think it's fun and just a nice little thing to make. If you didn't want to make a brooch, you could just appliqué the flower onto a bag or anything you like. You wouldn't need to back the piece with felt if you are just appliquing it. And here's a larger one that I appliqued onto a pouch, and at the end of the video I'll show you some more ideas for what you can do with your little patchwork flowers. So now I'm using the dual petal shape, and again these are 3/8 of an inch, and this just creates a different type of flower. As you can see, the dual petal has a pointed end and a curved end, so basting the shape is just slightly different. Again, the same 1/4 inch or less seam allowance, and the same with the curve, just gently pushing it around to get it nice and smooth. But just baste all of the shapes in the same direction, because you get those little dog ear flaps at the bottom like you would when you baste a diamond, and you want all of them to be facing the same way. So once you've done 6 of those, you can start to join them together with a whip stitch. Just line up those straight edges, make sure the corners and the points at the bottom line up to keep everything nice and neat, and just whip stitch it together in exactly the same way. I like to do them into 2 groups of 3 and then join the 2 halves together. I've found that if I go around in a circle like I would with a hexagon flower, I end up with a hole in the centre with these shapes, and the same for diamonds too. So I prefer to join them like this. So make 2 groups of 3 and then stitch them together right across the centre, and that way you shouldn't get a hole in the middle. You will find that the little dog ear flaps can get in the way, just push them out of the way and then you get a nice jewel flower. I also made this 3/8 of an inch hexagon in the centre and jewels this time flower. It's like a star flower. They are not jewel petals, they are actual jewels, so all of the sides are straight. So it's exactly like sewing together hexagons, except you get the points at the top, the dog ear flaps, and I'm just using the glue to push them down behind the point, and I'm really taking care not to squish it and not to lose the pointiness of the point. So it just takes a bit of practice, but the glue works really well for doing that. And when they're all done, again I'm going to back this with felt and make it into a little brooch, and I'm just going to do it in exactly the same way as I did the flower earlier on, but I'm going to show you a different stitch for securing it to the felt. So this time I'm just over sewing the edge and the thread is visible on the outside, but I'm using such a fine thread, I'm using Invisifil, that you really can't hardly see it at all. And this stitch is a little bit stronger and a little bit more secure, and you will have less gaps. And it's also a bit quicker to do and a bit easier when you come to the points, because they're the tricky bit, which is why I chose to do this sort of stitch. And it doesn't take very long to do. Again, this flower probably took me about 45 minutes to make, and I'm going to put a brooch on the back of that too. I think these make really lovely gifts. They're quick to make and they're perfect for popping in the post to your friend who loves Liberty fabric. If you go to my website and click on the free patterns page and scroll down to Dresden flower, you'll find the final patchwork flower that I want to show you today. This time it's not with hexiform, it's a free printable that you can download, and there's a little video there. It's an old video, but it does show you how to make it. And here is the printable template for a little Dresden flower. And I decided to applique mine to linen, and I put it in a hoop. And this is something you could do with any of the flowers that I've shown you today. Remember, you won't need to back them with felt if you are going to just applique them to a backing fabric. I recommend using starch to spray your piece before you remove the papers, and this will help to keep your curves and your points nice. And I didn't back the hoop with anything, but you could put felt across the back, but it hangs on the wall in my bedroom and you can't see. Another thing that you could do with any of these flowers is put them in a frame. I've put this one in a glass frame with some pressed flowers, but you could use any frame. But that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed seeing these little patchwork flowers. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, leave them below, and I'll see you next week. Bye bye.